Well, and we work with Dr. John Beebe directly. He's a Jungian psychotherapist. He developed the 8 function model in cognitive functions and personality type. He's an author, speaker. He's in his 80s, and we do personal coaching with him to expand our knowledge of both Jungian concepts and Myers-Briggs and personality type concepts. And one of the things we talked about with John in one of our most recent sessions when we were working with him is we were talking about this idea of shadow. And if the choice is made at midlife to not embrace some of the shadow material and look at it, the shadow can actually expand into territory we've already brought into the light. And that was blowing my mind as we were talking about this and he was sharing this with us. I was like, that resonates a lot. I've seen people, and we're going to talk about it in a moment here, elderhood, late adulthood, that it feels like they've lost something they once had. And I'm like, how is that possible? You're in your 70s or 80s. You should be the most mature, open-minded, well-rounded, expansive person ever that is you than you've ever been in your entire life. And yet you kind of hit this high water mark and you almost slunk back down into shadow material. There's things that I knew them when they were in their midlife. My parents' generation, I've known them. And I knew they were aware of things that they're not aware of about themselves now. Their shadow increased.
I'm related to some of these people.
I am too. And I'm like kind of terrified for myself. I'm like, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to lose the awareness of how I'm showing up to other people. And I think it really speaks to that fork in the road. And a lot of people didn't have maybe somebody attune them to it. They didn't know what to do there. It's not like they had the roadmap in front of them. They chose not to follow the roadmap. They didn't maybe have awareness, and society and culture probably didn't support it at times in past too. But that horrifies me because I don't want to get into my elderhood and be less aware of myself and other people and be very myopic. I don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at this going, I definitely want to choose the avenue, the pathway of let's bring this. I mean, it's painful. It's hard. I don't really like it. It's not, there's some good stuff in my shadow too that I find out about myself, but it's not always fun. And yet I'm looking at, 30 years, 40 years down the road going, I don't certainly want to end up like people I know, and not everybody I know, but enough that it's a warning. It's the canary in the coal mine for me. I'm like, I do not want to go that route.
Well, and you can tell when people made the choice to embrace their shadow or do shadow work, even if they don't know type. They just made the choice to
be aware of things.
Yeah, to understand more about who they are as people and not be so egotistically or egoistly fragile and, not double down and having to always be the person who's right. That's really what it comes down to. Do you have to be a person who's always right? Can you just let go of that a little bit? Can you be wrong?
Input?
Yeah.
Can you hear other people and input and listen?
Yeah. And even on big stuff, can you have been wrong about major life choices? Can you have been wrong about your belief systems and structures? If the answer is I can't be wrong about any of those stuff, I had to have been right the entire time, then you're just not going to be able to see shadow content because the shadow is like, no, you were wrong a lot of times. Right. But if you can go, yeah, no, I've been wrong a lot. In fact, maybe everything, right? Maybe everything's been wrong. And you're willing to see that and not have it crush you. That's the other thing, is that sometimes we think we're doing shadow work when really we're just self-flagellating.
Yeah.
We're just like, I'm a terrible, horrible person and I'm just awful and I'm like the worst. And it's like, that's not shadow work. That's just self-torture. You're just a masochist at that point. So you have to have the resilience to be able to look at the bad content and the good content that's in the shadow, because the shadow is anything you're unconscious of. And sometimes we resist good stuff because our ego doesn't like to see it for fill in the blank reason. But when we start receiving this information from the shadow, it's work because, you can't take it all in at one time. That would truly be crushing. Sometimes people have to do that. That's a terrible moment and it takes a while to recover. But if you can just bite off a little bit at a time and be willing to get feedback from the outside world on the things you have to work on and go, okay, you're right. I got to work on that thing. And you just kind of build up some resilience to it. Eventually you go, oh, it was actually my need to always be right. That was the burden, right? You start letting all of that go and you realize there's an extraordinary, phenomenal freedom in this space of just like, yeah, I was wrong. And then that's it. That's all. It doesn't have to be the end of the world. You just go, yeah, I'm not always right. Okay, done.
Yeah. And I would just, if you're listening along, one thing I could offer to you that I wrote on here is I think anywhere you have, if you're in midlife, anywhere you are still attached to an idealism, an ideal that hasn't bared out in reality in your life, and you're at midlife, so you know it hasn't bared out. Like you got the numbers, you got the math.
Right.
Like
you have the receipts.
I had a lot of idealism that didn't pan out, and if I'm getting to midlife and I double down on it should have been this ideal way. Well, now I'm really choosing not to see what is and how I contributed to what is in my life. I'm saying, no, I'm going to keep playing to this ideal outside of myself, and I'm not going to look at the shadow, and I'm going to just double down. And I think that's a recipe for suffering.
So can I ask you a quick question? I don't want to go too much on a
Sure.
tangent, but as somebody with intuitive feeler preferences, which, Kiersey called the idealists, how do you, as somebody with ENFP preferences, reconcile this idea of too much idealism is actually going to prevent me from being able to see shadow content, but I also am somebody who's pre-wired to be a little bit more idealistic? What's the reconciliation there?
It's tough. It's hard. I'm in the midst of it, actually, in a lot of ways. I'm letting go a lot of that idealism. I think for me, the idealisms are okay as long as they are, like, I still think in idealistic terms, like what's possible, but in intention, not in actuality. So, like, I would like a world that people are peaceful and kind to each other. But if that's a metric and not an intention, I'm gonna have a lot of suffering in my life. So I've detached ideals from metrics, and I've attached them more to intentions and directions of things going. And so that's how I've reconciled it. I've reconnected it to a different kind of framework. Mm-hmm. And so as long as we're moving in the right direction toward the ideal, and I recognize that an ideal by definition can never be achieved, I can let go of some of that being the metric of the ideal itself. Because I think that's what I was always thinking. It's, we can get to this. I think that's really where an NF has to make the shift, is we can get to this as a metric, as a measurement. And I don't think that's possible. I don't think an ideal can be a measurement. I think it's just an intention.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for clarifying that, because I think that makes me think of Tony Robbins' disempowering rules.
Yeah.
Which is that disempowering rules are when we say things have to be just so in order for me to be okay, or in order for me to be happy. And he said that those are totally disempowering. It's like, well, the most empowering rule is no matter what happens, I'm going to have fun. So what I hear you saying is that you haven't let go of the desire, the idealistic desire. You still want that, and you still have it as an intention. You're going to move towards that, and you're going to try to build this world that you'd like to see. But you're going to let go of the disempowering role of having to have it, right? Yeah. And if it doesn't happen, then I'm going to be upset, or it's not okay. Is that effectively it?
I think that's very close to how it feels for me.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you.